Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Siddiqui, the father of Holophase. Part 25 of Ep.7, Dispersion Rules as Grammar Rules. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase. One continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. Our climb through Ep.7 has brought us to majestic heights. We have seen the whole tree and learned its core alphabet. We have climbed the infinite towers of temporal and spatial nuance and explored the discrete digital core of topological semantics. We have witnessed how singularities can have full dimensional identities, persisting in time, holding shape in space, and moving through the world. Now, we step into a new, flowing chapter of the language. We enter Chapter 6, Wave Semantics. This chapter is about how patterns travel, how information flows, and how the universe orchestrates its grand, dynamic conversations. And we begin at the very heart of this orchestration, with the rules that govern the marriage of time and space in traveling patterns. We begin with Part 25, Dispersion Rules as Grammar Rules. This is where the holophase language reveals its syntax. If derivatives are the words, dispersion rules are the grammar, the fundamental laws that dictate which words can be combined to form meaningful, traveling sentences. 1. The first question of travel. What rhythm goes with what texture? Imagine you want to create a traveling pattern in the phi field, a wave. You have two fundamental choices from the core alphabet. First, you choose a temporal rhythm, an omega. How fast will it oscillate? Second, you choose a spatial texture, a k. How tightly will its crest be packed in space? A naive guess might be that any omega can go with any k, that you can have a slow, churning wave with very fine texture, or a rapid flicker with broad, gentle hills. But the universe says no. In any given medium, whether it is water, air, glass, the quantum vacuum, or even an abstract social medium, only certain specific pairs of omega and k are allowed to travel together. This allowed pairing is the dispersion relation. It is a rule, a law, a grammatical constraint of reality. Think of it like building a sentence in a spoken language. You have nouns and verbs, but you cannot combine them arbitrarily and still get something meaningful. The dispersion relation is the universe's grammar book that says, in this medium, this omega can only work with that k, and that k can only carry this omega. It defines the allowed subject-verb pairs for traveling patterns. Operationally, a dispersion relation is a function. Omega is a function of k. For each wave number, each spatial texture, it tells you the one or several allowed frequencies, the temporal rhythms that can exist and travel coherently in that form. This simple rule has immense consequences. It determines how fast a wave packet moves, its group velocity, whether it spreads out or stays focused as it travels, how it bends when entering a new medium, and how waves of different frequencies interfere to form beats, envelopes, or solitons. In short, the dispersion relation is the conductor score for the symphony of traveling patterns. It tells each instrument, each K, what note, which omega to play, and how those notes relate to produce the overall movement of the piece. 2. Linguistic role, the fundamental syntax. In the holophase language, dispersion rules are the core syntactic rules. Phi is the silent page. Omega and K are the first meaningful letters, the primal verbs and nouns of time and space. Dispersion relations are the first grammar rules. They are the subject-verb agreement rules of physics. They answer the question, which temporal verbs can this spatial noun perform? This syntactic role is foundational. Without grammar, words are just a list. Without dispersion rules, omega and k are just isolated numbers. The dispersion rule organizes them into a dynamic unit capable of propagation. It is the rule that allows the alphabet to form words that move. In the master tree, dispersion rules sit at a crucial synthesis node. They live at the junction of the temporal tower, which provides omega, the spatial tower, which provides k, and the mixed tower, which will describe the propagation dynamics that result. They are the bridge from the static description of local pattern, what omega and k are at a point, to the dynamic description of traveling pattern, a wave moving through the field. 3. Scientific essence, the menu of possible waves. Scientifically, the dispersion relation emerges from the specific physical laws governing the medium, which, in the holophase view, are themselves expressions of constraints among phi's derivatives. To make this tangible, consider some everyday examples. For light in a vacuum, the grammar is simple and strict. Omega equals c times the magnitude of k, where c is the speed of light. In words, the frequency is exactly proportional to the wave number. If you double the spatial frequency, having the wavelength, you must double the temporal frequency. This is a linear, non-dispersive grammar. All colors, all omegas, travel at the same speed c. A pulse of white light does not spread out in vacuum because all its components share the same speed. For sound in air, in simple conditions, the grammar is similar. Omega equals the speed of sound times the magnitude of k. Again, a linear, non-dispersive rule. All pitches travel at essentially the same speed, so a sharp sound, like a clap, remains sharp as it moves through the air, ignoring echoes and reflections. For deep-water gravity waves on the surface of the ocean, the grammar is more interesting. Omega squared equals g times the magnitude of k, where g is the acceleration due to gravity. This is a nonlinear rule. If you double the wave number, making the waves twice as close together, the frequency only increases by a factor of the square root of 2. As a result, longer waves, with smaller k, travel faster than shorter waves. This is why, far out at sea, the swell from a storm arrives as long, rolling waves first, while the short, choppy waves lag behind. For quantum matter waves, the de Broglie waves of a free particle, the grammar is omega equals h divided by 2m times k squared, where h is Planck's constant and m is the particle's mass. This quadratic dispersion leads to strong spreading of wave packets, a fundamental feature of quantum evolution. Each medium, defined by its own structure and interaction rules, its own sentence in the phi language, has its own dispersion grammar. This grammar is the fingerprint of the medium's dynamic personality. 4. Dimensional expression, the rule that binds the echoes. The dispersion relation is one of the purest expressions of dimensional binding. It does not just have echoes in time, space, and motion, it is the rule that defines their relationship. From the time perspective, for a given spatial pattern K, the dispersion relation issues a license for existence in time. It says, if you want to look like this in space, you must pulse with this exact rhythm in time. It dictates the permissible temporal tempos for a given spatial texture. From the space perspective, for a desired rhythm omega, the dispersion relation dictates the allowed spatial textures. It says, if you want to beat with this frequency, you must arrange yourself with one of these specific spacings in space. It dictates the permissible wavelengths for a given temporal pitch. From the motion perspective, the dispersion rule gives rise to speed and spreading. From the function omega k, we can compute the group velocity, the speed at which the envelope of a wave packet moves, by taking the derivative d omega over dk. This group velocity tells us how fast a localized packet of energy or information travels. The second derivative, d squared omega over dk squared, tells us whether the packet will spread out, disperse as it travels, or remain tightly focused. In this way, the dispersion rule generates kinematic properties from the marriage of rhythm and texture. Motion, speed, and spreading emerges from the way time and space are bound together. Phi. Position in the master tree, the foundational junction. In our Episode 7 architecture, dispersion rules occupy a pivotal foundational junction in the wave semantics branch. They are built directly from the first-order derivatives, omega and k. They provide the input and governing principle for all higher wave semantics: group velocity, envelope evolution, information transport, interference patterns, and more. They are deeply connected to the mixed tower, because the derivatives of the dispersion relation, such as d omega by dk and d squared omega by dk squared, appear as mixed derivative terms that control propagation and deformation of wave packets. This junction is where the static, local description of reality, how phi is changing here and now, transforms into the dynamic, global description, how patterns propagate, communicate, and interact across space and time. It is the gateway through which the language begins to describe not just patterns that exist, but patterns that travel. 6. Relations to neighboring branches. The central coordinator dispersion rules act as central coordinators, connecting multiple branches of the master tree. With the core alphabet of omega and k, the dispersion relation is the direct constraint that links them. With the mixed tower, the derivatives of the dispersion relation determine how wave packets accelerate, slow down, and change shape. They enter the effective equations that describe wave envelopes and their evolution. With envelope evolution, which you can think of as the story of how wave packets broaden or focus, the second derivative of the dispersion relation is the key parameter that sets the strength of dispersion. With topological semantics, there is a deeper, more subtle relationship. In some materials, the dispersion relation itself can carry topological information. In topological insulators, for example, the shape and connectivity of omega k in momentum space determine the existence of robust one-way edge states. Even the grammar rules can have a topological character. With future chapters on quadratic balances and action principles, many dispersion relations emerge from simple quadratic relations such as omega squared minus c squared k squared equals 0, showing that the grammar of dispersion is rooted in the deeper balancing tendencies of the field. In this way, the dispersion relation is like a central switchboard. Many of the most important lines in the language of reality pass through it. Semantic meaning. The can in what can happen. The semantic meaning of dispersion rules is that they define the realm of possible communication. In a spoken language, grammar defines what is a permissible, meaningful utterance. In the holophase language, a wave pattern with an omega and k that do not satisfy the dispersion relation of the medium is ungrammatical. It cannot exist as a stable, traveling entity. It might briefly form, but it will immediately break up into a superposition of waves that do obey the rule. Dispersion relations are therefore constraints of realizability. They answer questions like, what kinds of stories can be told in this medium? What kinds of signals can travel here? They are the universe's way of saying, in this place, under these conditions, only stories with this particular relationship between rhythm and detail can be transmitted. They act as gatekeepers of dynamical meaning. 8. Stability, variability, and falsifiability. For a given uniform medium, The dispersion relation is a stable, fixed property. It is as intrinsic to the medium as its composition and structure. The grammar of light in vacuum does not change. The grammar of sound in a given gas at fixed temperature stays constant. This stability is what allows predictable communication. You can send a signal knowing how it will travel. At the same time, dispersion relations vary widely from medium to medium. The simple linear grammar of light in vacuum contrasts with the more complex grammar of waves in plasmas, spin waves in magnets, or vibrations in complex materials. The universe is a library of different grammatical rulebooks, each governing the dynamics of waves in its own domain. Crucially, dispersion relations are directly testable. In any wave-bearing system, you can independently measure omega and k and see how they relate. In optics, you shine light of specific frequencies through a medium and measure the resulting wavelengths, for example using diffraction or interference, and then plot omega versus k. In vacuum, you get a straight line with slope c. In glass, you get a curve that explains why prisms split white light into colors. In acoustics, you create sound at known frequencies in a tube, measure the distance between pressure nodes, and again plot omega against k, recovering the linear rule in simple cases. In plasmas, you launch waves of different frequencies and measure their wavelengths, using the resulting omega k diagram to infer plasma properties. In water tanks, you generate surface waves of different frequencies, measure their spatial spacing, and empirically recover the omega squared equals gk rule for deep water. A serious failure of the holophase description would occur if, in a well-defined uniform medium, where the holophase equations predict a particular dispersion relation, experiments consistently found that wave patterns did not obey any consistent omega k relation, or obey the relation that contradicted the derived one. But in practice, dispersion relations are among the most precisely measured and most reliably confirmed relationships in physics, forming a strong pillar of the framework. 9. Appearance in nature, the grammars of the world. Dispersion rules are the hidden conductors behind every wave phenomenon. In physics and engineering, fiber optic internet depends on the dispersion relation of light in glass fibers. The way pulses spread or remain sharp as they travel sets limits on data rates and determines how we design fibers. Seismic waves from earthquakes have dispersion relations that differ for different types of waves and depend on depth and composition. By analyzing this dispersion, geophysicists reconstruct the Earth's interior structure. Radio wave propagation in the ionosphere is governed by a dispersion relation that changes with time of day and solar activity. This explains why some frequencies bounce back to Earth while others escape into space. In chemistry and materials, electron waves in solids have dispersion relations that form energy bands and gaps. The band structure, omega k, for electrons is what determines whether a material is a metal, a semiconductor, or an insulator. This is literally the grammar of electronic motion. Phonons, the quantized waves of lattice vibration, have their own dispersion relations, which control how heat propagates through a solid. In biology and physiology, neural signals along axons propagate with a characteristic speed that emerges from an effective dispersion relation combining membrane properties, ion channel dynamics, and cable geometry. Different axons, myelinated or unmyelinated, correspond to different grammars of signal travel. Patterns on animal coats, like stripes and spots, often arise from reaction diffusion processes, where the dispersion relation of chemical concentration waves sets the characteristic pattern scales. The pressure wave generated by your heartbeat travels down your arteries with a speed determined by the elasticity and diameter of the vessels. This too is captured in an effective dispersion relation. Doctors use the speed of that pulse wave as a diagnostic of arterial health. X. Appearance in human and abstract life. The idea of a dispersion rule, a constraint linking the rate of change to the scale of structure, appears in human systems as well. In economics and markets, news has an intrinsic frequency, how urgent, shocking, or novel it is, and the wavelength, how far and through which networks it spreads. The market has an effective dispersion rule that determines how quickly high impact news propagates, through which channels, and how it influences prices across different scales. In social dynamics, evolutionary ideas behave like waves. Their emotional intensity and simplicity correspond to an effective frequency, while the size and connectivity of the communities they spread through correspond to a kind of social wavelength. Simple, emotionally charged slogans may travel quickly and widely, while complex, nuanced ideas travel slowly through smaller circles. This is a social dispersion grammar that shapes how movements ignite and spread. Technological adoption curves, often described by S-shaped curves, also reflect an underlying dispersion in how innovation waves move through a population. In consciousness, there may be an effective cognitive dispersion rule. Quick, intuitive flashes of insight could correspond to fast-changing, localized neural patterns, while deep, contemplative reasoning corresponds to slower, broader patterns of activity. In language itself, syntax rules are the direct analog of dispersion relations. They dictate which combinations of elements become coherent sentences that can reliably transmit meaning between minds. 11. How to read dispersion rules in the world. You can begin to notice dispersion rules everywhere. Listen to sound in different environments and notice how it behaves in open spaces versus corridors or stairwells. Watch water waves at the beach and observe how long swells outrun short chop. Observe traffic on a busy road and see how slowdowns propagate backward. Notice whether large disturbances move differently than small ripples in the flow. Feel the spread of emotion in a group, noticing how some signals, like laughter or applause, propagate very quickly locally, while deeper moods spread slowly and more diffusely. A simple concrete practice is to drop two different sized stones into a still pond at the same time and watch the ripples. The larger stone produces waves with longer wavelength that typically travel faster, while the smaller stone produces shorter, slower waves. The ratio of their speeds and spacings is governed by the dispersion relation of the water surface. You are literally watching grammar in motion. 12. Connection back to phi and the complete tree. Returning to phi, we can now see dispersion rules as constraints born from phi's own self-consistency. When we ask phi to support a traveling wave, a pattern that maintains coherence as it shifts in space over time, phi replies with a condition. Only if your temporal and spatial derivatives satisfy this relationship. That condition is the dispersion relation. It is not an external law imposed on phi. It is phi's own requirement for coherent travel. It emerges from the same variational principles and derivative balances that define all of phi's behavior. Different grammars for different media are different dialects of the one holophase language, shaped by boundary conditions, interactions, and internal structure. With this, we have firmly entered wave semantics. We have grasped the first and most fundamental rule, the syntax of travel. Our complete picture of the holophase language now includes not just the alphabet and the topology, but also the grammar of motion. 13. Closing movement, the universe's rulebook. As we conclude our introduction to dispersion rules, hold this image of a universe governed by grammatical elegance. Before any wave can travel, before any signal can be sent, before any pattern can propagate, it must pass a grammatical test. It must find an omega and a k that are allowed partners in the medium's rulebook. This rulebook is not arbitrary. It is the deep mathematical expression of how that medium is woven from phi. This grammar is what makes communication possible. It is what allows a heartbeat to become a pulse, a thought to become a word, a light pulse in a fiber to become an email or a video call. It is the structural reason why patterns can carry meaning across distances without dissolving into noise. In our next part, we will explore a crucial distinction born from this grammar. We will investigate part 26, phase versus group meaning, where we learn that the rhythm of the crests and the speed of the message are two different stories told by the same dispersion rule. We will learn to distinguish the dance of the waves from the travel of the news. But for now, listen to the world with grammatical ears. Hear the allowed pairs of rhythm and texture in the wind, in the light, in the sound of a voice. You are listening to the universe obeying its own deep, beautiful, and testable syntax, the first grammar of the Holophase language. Peace be upon you until part 26.